Before I go on to anything else, I just want to say that Hiroki Chiba deserves a huge pat on the back for everything that he's achieved with World of Final Fantasy. While it may not appeal to everyone and does have deficiencies if you're looking at it with a cold, critical heart, this game is nothing short of a love letter to the Final Fantasy franchise, and as a long-time fan, I wholeheartedly appreciate it for what it is. Right, now that I've got that initial gushing out of the way, it's time for my full review of World of Final Fantasy. Yep, that other one was just a taster. This one's the real deal. It's going to be part fangasm, part critic, and part Daryl. So strap yourselves in, because you're in for one hell of an in-depth ride. To try and make things easier to digest, I'm going to cut this review into 4 clear chunks: story, gameplay, presentation, and lasting appeal. You can skip between these sections if you want using the annotations on screen, but I'd encourage you to listen all the way through to get a full taste of my experiences with the game. I'd also like to say that I'm desperately going to try and make this spoiler free, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm pretty damn good at that. However, I may reference the occasional locational character, often with no relation to the actual story, but it'll be to emphasize a point. So if you want to be completely blind to everything, well, screw that. Why the hell would you be watching this review if you want to be completely blind to everything? Alright, anyway, let's roll. And if you enjoy this review, please give me a big old like and subscribe to the channel! As most of you know, World of Final Fantasy focuses on Rain and Lan, 2 brand new characters who, along with their trusty ally Tama, go on an adventure to the magical world of Grimoire. But before we get there, let's take a step back and look at Ninewood Hills, the hub world outside of Grimoire. In a rather unorthodox move, and as a complete juxtaposition to pretty much everything else in the game, we are led to believe that Rain and Lan lead pretty standard lives. Lan even starts out the game as a barista in a coffee shop. This all changes though when one day everyone in Ninewood Hills disappears. Someone called Enocro appears to tell them they've lost all their memories, and that to gain them back they have to go to this place called Grimoire and collect these things called mirages. If they do so, they'll become stronger and they'll be able to find their family. It's as flimsy a plot as you'll probably find, but I'll give it a free pass because it actually works quite well. This flimsiness is rather commonplace throughout parts of the game, and the only reason that I'm willing to give it that free pass is because the game is more than aware of it, often mocking itself through banter between the characters. For example, at one point Rain asks why mirages are randomly dropping money. It makes no sense, and it's a common question that everyone always asks in these games. Tama just brushed it off by saying, well, it's all due to Enocro. Doesn't really elaborate on it any further, but it's just a running theme. That kind of thing happens quite a lot throughout the game. It's something I actually quite appreciated, because in a game like this that clearly doesn't take itself too seriously, I really don't care about the tiny little nuances. It's not meant to be a realistic simulation. Anyway, I guess my point with all of this is that the opening sequences are rather woolly around the edges, an empty vessel to serve as an impetus for the protagonists, if you will. There's limited substance there when you put it into context of the story as a whole. That is instead added slowly as you venture around Grimoire, but I can't imagine the game starting straight in Grimoire, or Ninewood Hills not existing. It's a necessary device. Once you do actually head to Grimoire, the feels will start flooding in. The story, while random to the nth degree, also feels incredibly well crafted, and that isn't just in relation to the development of characters, it also relates to the locations you visit and the personality they exude. Many of them, even if they're quite minimal, tell quite the story, and they aren't always represented how you'd expect them to be. One that stood out for me is the sequence that can be easily related back to Final Fantasy VII. You start off going through some innocuous mountains, encounter some red dragons. Fair enough, it's pretty standard. Until Tifa appears in her Crisis Core getup, smacks one in the face, and it becomes clear that it's an ode to Mount Nibel and the dragon that Sephiroth fights. This then leads into them heading to Nibelheim, which has actually been merged with Midgar. I couldn't help but sit back and admire how they blended the different worlds, introduced the characters we know and love, and used Rain and Lan as characters who, through their actions, help us to learn more about the world until we get to the point where we're no longer novices. And it's at this point that the game takes its next step. When that happens, you will know about it. I mentioned in my previous reviews that there had been some bombshells, and the game does take an interesting turn. However, I'd say up until that point, much of the game is actually quite superficial, which is fine, but I didn't really appreciate there being approximately 16 to 17 hours set aside for just crafting the world, doing the basic introductions with the characters, and essentially just setting up for this one big thing to happen. Progressive story moments up to this point are just so far and few between. After this twist, where the walls kind of break down a little, everything feels a lot more integrated, and the game somewhat loses its forced smile of happiness. It actually quite surprised me, because despite it being a game geared towards the younger demographics, after this point there's a distinct darkness that starts to creep in, and I honestly shouldn't be too surprised given that one of the main scenario writers is Sarah Okabe, who also worked on Final Fantasy Type 0's story with Hajime Tabata, and you guessed it, Hiroki Chiba. This darker side is perhaps more apparent with intervention missions. I'm not going to delve into them with any great detail, but one in particular made me take a step back and have a minute to ponder, like whoa, this is some seriously deep shit right there. Would I really want my young daughter playing this? Upon consultation with Laura, the answer was a distinct no, we do not. Needless to say, I enjoyed where the story went, and upon its conclusion, I'd say I was pretty satisfied. Classic characters from across the franchise were a big part of this satisfaction too. Some of them have more prominent roles than others, but the main thing for me was how well most of them are represented. I'd say my main disappointment was that I felt like some of them were literally just added in to make up the numbers, while others had a bit more substance to their inclusion. I'm going to single out Riku and Snow here, as although I love them for who they are, their role within the story was pretty much throwaway. Outside of a few intervention missions, their screen time amounts to nothing more than a couple of minutes, and even in those couple of minutes, it's not like they actually did anything that was useful. I'm glad that this is isolated though, and that other characters have much larger roles. Their interactions with Rain and Lan work really well, especially in the later stages of the game, and they don't ever feel out of place. I never got the impression, aside from, as I mentioned, a few isolated cases, that they were just there for the sake of it. Again, I feel this is to the credit of the writers. Side note, Transformer03 asked me who my favourite returning character is, and I'd probably have to go with... probably Shantota actually. It's perhaps an odd choice, but I just love the fact that they kept her ambiguous allegiance in there. The first time you meet her, I remember just thinking, oh dear lord, why is this happening? Why? I also love the fact that there's just a couple of Easter eggs that appear in her shop, such as the fire staff and that casting animation that they used when she did white magic. Aside from that, I do love how Yuna and Tidus are represented their sequences together. It's just anyone who's played Final Fantasy X will get a massive kick out of that. It's at this point I was thinking, I should probably talk about the antagonists in the game. I think the reason why I didn't mention them earlier is because they're just rather mediocre. The design of the Plume Knight and the Knight in the Golden Mask are interesting, but their involvement along with Brandelis is just far too sparse to leave any real lasting impression. One of the scenes that happens in Saronia is pretty standout in terms of development, but they're far and few between, and the fact that I'm having to stretch to call that scene a standout in terms of development is not a good thing. It's only that scene that I was referencing earlier, where you take a step back and think, alright, let's see what you did there, but it's more in awe of what they did as opposed to who they are. I feel that if I was playing this as a non-Final Fantasy fan, which is obviously a difficult mindset to get into as I just can't erase my memory, the story would feel a little flat. It's my love for the franchise that helps me appreciate what they've done, but outside of that, while there are some really good parts, it's nothing really to write home about. I'm going to slap myself at some point for making this comparison, but compared to something like Kingdom Hearts, there are deficiencies, mainly in the original cast of characters. Rain and Lan are good, and I actually enjoyed their development, and this isn't a slight against them, and Tamara is a decent foil too, but when it boils down to it, as I mentioned before, their motivations are a little flimsy. They're trying to save their parents, who they don't even remember. That's pretty much it. They end up latching onto a quest to save Grimoire from the Bahamutian army, but their main objective is still the same, save their parents, who they don't remember. Now don't get me wrong, I did enjoy the story, and this is me being a little overcritical here, but if you do go back to Kingdom Hearts, the original characters, in the first game at least, had stronger motivations to fight for and against each other. They were clear, and they were relatable. The characters from other properties helped drive this, as they do in World of Final Fantasy, but it was the original characters in Kingdom Hearts that were the driving force. In World of Final Fantasy, this side of things just didn't feel strong enough for me, at least until the game was too far on. In summary, I appreciate the story as someone who's invested in the franchise. It's adorable, if not superficial, and once the twist happens, it does come to life in a big way. I was absolutely living for some of the cutscenes and the darker side of what happens, but I can't ignore the elements that felt a bit subpar, because this is a Final Fantasy game, and it was billed as having a story that's on par with the main series. I don't really feel like they managed to achieve that. It's also nowhere near that 100 hours they spoke about. It's more in line with what I mentioned in my previous review. I faffed around quite a bit, and the game took me around 30 hours to finish, which is still decent, but I know some people were a bit surprised when I mentioned that before. Alright, I think I'm probably about ready to move on to no wait, interventions. I was thinking about putting these in the lasting appeal section, but they're also quite applicable to the story. Not so much with the overall progression, although there are some mandatory ones at some point, but because of the development it gives to the Final Fantasy characters who appear. To break it down, interventions are offered by the girl who forgot her name, and they allow Rain and Lan to assist champions when they're in need. This leads to some rather comical and ironic story segments where you'll end up doing things like witnessing the almost creation of the Final Fantasy VI opera featuring Celes and Cloud, and see Yuna get baffled by a villager who's going to sacrifice her life so that other villagers can have a period of peace. Pot, meat, kettle. For what they are, I really enjoy these interactions. They're just a nice little ode to the franchise's more serious past, and I'm sure you guys are going to get a kick out of them. And with that, I am now ready to move on to gameplay. I'll just start off here by saying that I've been impressed by the mechanics on show in World of Final Fantasy. It sees a return of a more traditional style of active time battle system, but there are some modifications thrown in to keep things interesting. The visual style has also been updated to make things seem a bit more fluid. The basic setup is that you have turns, and they have turns. This gets plotted out on a time bar which appears on the left hand side of the screen and is rather akin to what we saw in Final Fantasy X, except that the order isn't predetermined and is instead dependent on your agility. One of the things I liked about this is that within the options menu you can modify things around a bit. You can either choose to have this battle system work on a wait, semi-active or active system, and you can also choose to speed the default battle speed up if things are taking a bit too long for your liking. In addition, when in battles, you can also press R1 to speed things up even further, and there's also an auto battle option that allows you to just have the combat play out manually, using your last command as your designated action. All of these things made me very happy. Adding the stacking mechanic on top of this made me slightly euphoric. It's a deep, rich system and deserves some special praise due to its versatility, and the fact that despite having this versatility, its impact has not become diminished at all. For a quick synopsis of the mode, as mentioned in the story segment, your main objective is to capture mirages. Up to 4 of these mirages can fight alongside you in battle, and they level up as members of your team. It's not like Final Fantasy 13-2 where monsters act as a third member of your party. Instead, they actually join Rain and Lan to create 2 supercharged teams, or can even split out to have 6 individuals to use in a single turn. This is dubbed stacking and unstacking. When stacked, all of the stats, including HP and MP, get combined, and depending on which mirages you use, you will receive channel bonuses such as elemental attack, resistances, and even new abilities. When unstacked, all of these stats get separated, but you can attack more regularly from different perspectives. Let's give an example. One of your mirages has Protect, another has Shell. If you're in a stack, you need 2 full turns to be able to cast these spells, but unstacked, they can be cast in the same turn rotation. It gives the whole game a much more strategic feel, but of course if you're unstacked, it makes you much more vulnerable. I guess the only shame is that implementing this kind of strategic thinking is almost never necessary due to the game being pretty easy. The only time I ever actually unstacked was to preempt my stack from breaking, something you want to avoid, as when this happens members get separated and they get stunned for a brief period of time. Later on, when you're facing area of effect magic, this can become a little problematic. However, using balance or just doing the old unstack restack trick is about as strategic as it really needs to get. Most of the time I was able to just coast through the game using basic attacks, and I didn't even grind at all. There were a handful of bosses that tested me a little, but with both stacks rocking cure and an ample supply of full health Phoenix items, you'll hardly ever see the game over screen. I'd say this aspect was slightly disappointing, but I was also kind of glad as you have to do a lot of fights in this game. I mentioned in my previous review about padding, and man, there is some serious padding in this game. Looking at some of the timestamps from my playthrough, the Crystal Tower dungeon for example took me 1 hour and 40 minutes to complete. For all the positives of the ATB system, by the end of it you'll just want the battles to be over as quickly as possible so you can plow through to the next story sequence. Some of the other elements presented are also a bit balmy. At one point you'll get to play some minigames and wow, they are pretty terrible. Man, I was so thankful they could be skipped with no penalty because they are genuinely painful to play through. Anyway, back to the positives. The stacking system obviously wouldn't be anything without the mirages, and there are an absolute ton of these in the game. Mirages come in 4 different sizes, but only 3 of them can be used in stacks, and only 2 at one time. It all depends on how you use Rain and Lan. Both of them can appear in battle as either a medium or large mirage depending on if you're a Lilican or Giant mode, so then you just need to make sure the other 2 slots are filled. I don't really know why, but I settled on Rain as a Lilican and Lan as a Giant. My team towards the end of the game added up as follows. So in Rain stack with her as a Lilican, I ended up with a Mini Flan and the Chrome Giant, and with Lan as a Giant, I used the Mini Behemoth form, and most of the time I actually just used Hammer. This worked out quite well for me. Throughout the majority of the game I didn't actually ever change Lan's stack once I'd got that initial setup, but I did switch out Rain's a little bit depending on who I was fighting. What I loved about the Mirage system was that it actually had a lot of depth offered. Take the Chrome Giant for example. This guy actually started off for me as a Copper Gnome, which I then transfigured into a Mithril Giant. Then I unlocked the System Mirage board to turn this guy, who I call Jerry, into a Chrome Giant. Some of the Mirages can get transfigured into a ton of different Mirages, and the great thing about it is that when you transfig, their stats get retained. It's only the abilities that switch around. It means that you can actually capture a Behemoth King, make him super powerful, then transfix him down to the mini Behemoth form, and he'll be just as strong, just in a different role within the team. Based on that, I can't understate how much I enjoyed this system and the positive impression it left on me. Orbital Dragon actually asked me a question in the last review about summons, and they are there. In the later part of the game, collecting them actually becomes a main part of the story, so they can't be missed as far as I'm aware. I didn't end up ever actually using any of them though, because it just didn't feel necessary. Same goes for champion summons too. I actually never used any of them because I didn't struggle enough to the point where I felt I needed to. In summary, I wouldn't say it's my favourite battle system ever, but I think the stacking mechanic is a strong innovation, and despite the overall game being quite easy, this doesn't detract from the positive feelings I have about the various mechanics, whether it be stacking, mirages, or the mirage board, which I feel makes it the perfect time to jump onto presentation. This is, without question, one of the things that has drawn people into World of Final Fantasy. There are two distinct art styles present throughout the game, those of the Giants and those of the Lillikans, but it's the fact that all the older Final Fantasy characters are represented as Lillikans that has fans all giddy with excitement. Square Enix already knew this was a recipe for success following stuff like Theatrhythm, but World of Final Fantasy takes this cutesy art style a little further. Many of the designs are actually directly influenced by Picked Logica, a free-to-play puzzle game that was released in Japan 3 years ago, but they were transitioned to the game by Yasuhisa Izumisawa to great effect. Likewise, the giant characters were designed by Tetsuya Nomura in his classic style. It's so blatant, and I guess it's to his credit, that when my mum popped over to see me the other day, she instantly said, "Oh, is this the new Final Fantasy game?" Yes mum, yes it is. I don't want to labour on the art style too much. I think you guys pretty much know everything there is to know about it, as it was one of the main promotional tools for the game. The only thing I can add is that the animated cutscenes, even if they aren't that relevant, are hilarious. It was one of those things where I never expected them when they happened, but when they did, I so appreciated it. I guess in a way it's also how I felt about the music in the game. I knew beforehand that Masashi Hamwazu, the game's main composer, was going to be tasked with rearranging quite a few pieces from classic Final Fantasy music, but due to the game's mishmash story, where everything is integrated with everything, I never quite knew what upcoming music selection was going to be, or what tracks they were going to use. It meant that I had lots of nice surprises. There was some talk about Square Enix being a little bit worried about Hamwazu's dark style not being able to translate over to the cutesy nature of the game, but I'd say his work is very commendable. However, before I go any further, I do want to do an old Phoenix Wright hold it! Because many people aren't actually aware that Hamwazu wasn't the only musician working on this soundtrack. There were 3 others who contributed original music and arrangements of other tracks. Their names? Shingo Kataoka, Takashi Honda, and Hayata Takeda. Kataoka and Honda have actually worked together previously on Resident Evil games, which clearly makes them the perfect fit for a cutesy Final Fantasy game. Then again, I'm pretty sure we said the same thing about Kiichi Okabe and the other guys at Monaco when they worked on Nier, and that ended up being one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying the World of Final Fantasy soundtrack is in the same leagues as Nier, just that the composers come from interesting places, and I'd say that they each contributed in their own unique way. I love, for example, the theme of Ninewood Hills, which was composed by Hamwazu, and I love the arrangements of Hunter's Chance from Final Fantasy IX and Never Look Back from Final Fantasy VIII, which were both done by Kataoka and Takeda. Perhaps my favourite piece of music in terms of execution was the area theme rendition of Clash on the Big Bridge. It was so cleverly crafted, I just couldn't help but sit back and admire how the various elements were worked in. Oh, one more. The music that plays in the Sunken Temple is pretty special in my opinion. It takes a little while to get going, but the melody that comes in around 45 seconds is oozing with substance and style. I don't know about anyone else, but I just found myself getting transported away while listening to it. It's just amazing. One thing that I did find a bit odd though, and I can easily overlook it, is where the music is played. Sometimes it's on point, like the Sunken Temple, but at other times it's not quite so obvious. For example, Never Look Back plays while you're trying to escape from the Figaro Castle jail, which is actually a mecha reactor, where you're being assisted by Squall. Squall is therefore the link for them to play a track from Final Fantasy VIII, but still, it's a Final Fantasy VII area, so I was kind of expecting them to play Hurry instead. As I said though, and if I were to summarise the presentation as a whole, from both a visual and audio perspective, I was constantly left wondering what was coming up next, and then being left pleasantly surprised by what appeared. The designs of the mirages are awesome, the animated cutscenes are awesome, a lot of the arrangements are awesome, and the original pieces of music that appear are more than good enough to stand out amongst the classic pieces of old. Which brings me nicely onto the game's lasting appeal. I think World of Final Fantasy brings a lot to the table. It's perhaps not quite as grandiose as they tried to make out, but I was happy with the length of the game. If it had ended up being 100 hours long for the main story, I'm not sure I would have been able to tolerate that if I'm honest, so I'm glad they actually ended up making it somewhat shorter. Now, I'm under no illusion though that getting that Platinum Trophy is going to take you close, if not over that 100 hour mark. Not only do you have to get every Mirage in the game, you also have to do smaller things like open every single treasure chest, beat every single Merc Crypt, complete every single intervention, clean out the Colosseum, and master 100 Mirage boards. That's not an easy task alone, but when you combine it, that's a substantial list. Oh, did I actually mention there's extra dungeons that unlock when you finish the game? I think it's safe to say there's plenty of content to keep you busy after you complete the game, and that's great. People always talk about the side quests with Final Fantasy, and I'm happy with the additional content offered in World of Final Fantasy. Each of the elements I mentioned before aren't mandatory. Some of them aren't even connected to the story, and that's what makes them great. If you want to take some time out from the main story to battle some Mirage in the Colosseum, you can do that. If you want to do some interventions, you have that option too. There's also the PvP multiplayer, which became available with the game's day one patch, and this is something that Brody West asked me about. I haven't actually really dabbled with it thus far, but from what I can see it's fairly straightforward. You essentially square off against other Mirage collectors and battle to the death. It's no frills, it likely won't have any real legs, but as of right now it looks somewhat fun because there's lots of people playing it. To the wider question though, what do I think about the game's lasting appeal? I can see it being remembered as one of the better spin-off titles created under the Final Fantasy umbrella, and if I were to think about one Final Fantasy game that released in 2016 outside of 15, World of Final Fantasy would probably be next in line as opposed to Final Fantasy Explorers, Brave Exvius, Mobius, or Justice Monsters 5. However, I'm not too sure it will sell well enough outside the core Final Fantasy fanbase to warrant Square Enix giving it much more attention in the future. I'm just happy we got it though, and I'm happy they brought as much sass as they did. I mean, I didn't even mention the Mirage descriptions until now, which are just hilarious. Here's a selection of them for you to enjoy, ranging from Valefor's subtle hint that you should all get the Final Fantasy X 10.2 HD remaster, through to a request that you never call anyone a chocobro. Ever. It's nice to see a Final Fantasy game that doesn't take itself too seriously most of the time, but knows when it should. I mean, Lan is a bumbling buffoon, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't find myself shaking my head with disapproving laughter from time to time due to the sheer stupidity of what he says. What happens with Rain later on in the story also stuck with me, and I think that's what people will remember, the dynamic relationships they forge. Lan, Rain and Tama are some of the more unique characters to be introduced by Square Enix in recent times, and I really hope this isn't the last we see with them. That just reminded me of the One-Ins with You, although at least they did get some time to shine in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. In all seriousness though, if you're a fan of Final Fantasy in general, you will get an absolute kick out of this game. The only fans who might not are those who are heavily invested in the Evilise franchise, as there's no Final Fantasy XII representation. I'm kidding. Well, not about the lack of representation for Final Fantasy XII, more that any Final Fantasy fan should get a kick out of this, no matter where you come from. If you haven't played one before, it could still be a good intro experience, but I'm not sure it has the same quality to appeal to a wider audience, say like Kingdom Hearts did. Alright, the dreaded score. It's the business end of the video now where I dole out my verdict. If you've made it this far, wow, give yourself a pat on the back and let me know in the comments so I can give you a commendation. I'm actually going to give two scores. One as a Final Fantasy fan, and one as a more detached critic, because as I've mentioned in the review, I feel like the experience is actually a rather different one depending on where you're coming from. Okay, drum roll please. Ta-da! Yep, so as a fan, I feel that World of Final Fantasy is a solid 8 out of 10 game, and that's using 5 as an average here. It's a very appealing game, and I feel that any fan of the franchise will get something out of it as a standalone entry, and really, just a bit of fun. However, as more of a critic, I don't feel that World of Final Fantasy holds up so well, hence the lower score. The insider knowledge of the franchise feels too ingrained, and I feel it could serve as a bit of a barrier for anyone who's trying to look in. That might not be the case for some of the younger gamers who play, but anyone who's a bit older and hasn't experienced the franchise before, I just don't feel as though the game will resonate anywhere near as well with them. So that's my super long, in-depth review. What do you guys think of the game? If you haven't picked it up yet, are you planning to do so? Also, if you stuck around to the end, I thank you wholeheartedly for indulging this rather lengthy affair. If you could share it around and like it, that would be much appreciated. Until next time, this is Daryl, signing out.